Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have Justin Mayers with us. Justin, thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks for having me, Bronson.
Yeah, I think you wrote the perfect book for someone to come on this show. You're actually the co-author of the Traction book, and if that's not relevant, I don't know what's relevant for this show. So you wrote the Traction book, which is a startup guide for getting customers. You're also the former director of revenue at Airbrake, another topic that's going to be super valuable for this audience. And you teach a class called SQL for marketers and growth hackers. So you are the quintessential Growth Hacker TV guest. So welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, it should be a fun conversation. So let's jump right in. Let's talk about the Traction book. So you wrote the book, and it's actually called Traction. And they can find it at tractionbook.com. Is that right?
Yeah, so it'll be out on August 1st. And so, it'll be on Traction Book, Amazon. We have a hard copy, audiobook, ebook, all of that stuff is coming out.
Awesome.
So it'll be good.
So let's dive into some of the content of it. But first, how'd the book come about? What compelled you to co-author this book?
Yeah, so my co-author, Gabriel Weinberg, we basically saw this thing in startups where most startups are not failing anymore to build a product, but are actually failing because they can't get traction. And so this whole thing about the Series A crunch and startups, the failure rate of startups being super high, you very rarely see a startup that's yep, we failed because we couldn't build the product. It's always we couldn't get enough customers, we couldn't scale to where we needed to be to raise our next round of funding, to be profitable, to do whatever.
Yeah.
And so, whereas I think the lean startup came from kind of a viewpoint of companies are failing because they can't build a product or they're not building the right ones, I think the lean methodologies are pretty ingrained in the startup culture now, and most people are failing due to marketing and traction related reasons.
It's actually really similar to why we started Growth Hacker TV. We looked and we're like, look, anybody can build a product now. There's a new hurdle. And it's actually kind of an interesting idea is, do you have any idea what the next hurdle is? Or is growth the final frontier?
So honestly, I think it's going to be design-driven marketing. So I think you see things I think that growth hacks that are working well and marketing that's working well is increasingly blurring the line between a well-designed feature and marketing. So I think you see things like HubSpot's grader, their marketing grader, that is responsible for, I think, 50,000 leads a month or something. And that is a design-driven tool that is also their biggest marketing channel. It's just a weird kind of thing,
Yeah. So,
and I think
the future of startups is a weird mix.
Yeah. Yeah. But then, it's one of the things that we explore in the book is we basically introduce how successful startups should have approached traction and how they think about getting traction in the first couple of chapters. And one of the things that we talk about there is focusing to grow really, really rapidly. You focus on platforms and doing things that other people aren't. And so I think design-driven marketing is a thing now that more people should think about. But 2 years from now, if the book does well, then maybe that won't be something that works anymore.
Yeah, that's the way it is. Channels get crowded, and then you got to figure out something new. So who is this book for? Is it for the entrepreneur, the startup person? Is it for the marketer? Is it for both? Is it for something else? Who should read this?
Yeah, so I hate saying this because as a marketer, you're know your audience, target an audience, but really it's for all. It can help all of those people. And so I think if I look at the landscape of startup books, 4 Steps to the Epiphany, Lean Startups, Venture Deals, I think Traction Book should be one of the 4 or 5 books that you read if you are serious about starting a company.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, if you're running marketing for a startup or the founding a startup, I think this is something that you should read, or at the very least, read some blog posts or something we'll have coming out about it, and get these ideas into your head.
Yeah. And for those that are paying attention, that's how you position a new product when you come out with something, is you list out all the great ones and then put your name right there with them. So that's from a marketer right there. That's how you position a book. That's awesome. It's you've heard of Venture Deals. You should read this one too. That's awesome. Now, this book was written kind of through the lens of other growth experts. You did a lot of interviews and kind of pulled together a lot of that data. What was the reason for writing a book like that? I like the style of it. I think it's cool. What was the reason there?
Yeah, so it's kind of twofold. So basically, what both my co-author and I hate is reading a book that like a business book that could be like 50 pages and is, you know, kind of fluffed out to like 210 pages or something. So
I
when people
agree
buy it, they're like,
100%
oh,
with
this
that.
is a bargain, you know? And so we really condensed the like the crux of the book into the first 5 chapters, which is all strategy. Like, here's how you approach getting traction. Here's how you should think about getting traction. Here's how to be intentional about it, how to run tests, all this stuff. And then we have 19 other chapters. And in each chapter covers one traction channel. So for example, we have a chapter on PR, chapter on sales, chapter on paid advertising. And so we interviewed all these people because we wanted to write like the definitive book on marketing traction growth. And to do that, like I wasn't going to learn how to write a good offline ads, you know, and then try and become an expert in that field and then like position myself as an expert, because otherwise it'd just be me regurgitating like blog posts that I found on the internet.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to interview people that had success in each channel and get the best practices and like find out what worked for that channel.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to approach it. So as you look at the completed book now, what are your personal biggest takeaways concerning growth? Because I'm sure some of the things really hit home as you're hearing from these experts and what they've done.
Yeah, so the biggest one I think is that people don't take growth seriously enough. Like people, like if you were to talk to any startup founder, you'd be like, you know, what is your product development plan? Like what's on your roadmap? He's like, oh, we're going to release this feature and then do this. And then we're going to like release this. And you're like, sweet. What's your like plan to get traction or distribution? He's like, oh, like we have some blog posts, you know, it's like not even comparable in terms of how much effort and how much thought they're putting into like traction versus product development. And so I think that's just like a massive mistake that a lot of founders make.
Yeah.
You know, so not being intentional about it, not taking it seriously enough. And then the other big thing is that people don't pursue traction and product development in parallel. And so, you know, the lean startup is great, but what people how they end up applying lean startup is like interview 5 customers, build, launch back to those 5 customers. And like in reality, you want to approach both because you want to see like, okay, can our distribution channels scale in the same way that our product is scaling? Like you want to be testing out both things so you don't end up in this space that a lot of startups get to where it's like our product's done, engineering is like now just working on bug fixes and like some marginal feature improvements, and now we have to start getting traction. And they're like 6, 12, 18 months down the road of starting their company.
Yeah.
And that's a pretty common problem, and it's just terrible.
No, those are 2 great kind of high-level takeaways. What's your favorite quote in the book? And I ask you because you interviewed so many experts, I want to kind of know what's the nugget that you just really liked.
Yeah, so one of my favorites was back to the existing platforms thing. So we interviewed Alex Pachikov of Evernote, and he was talking about how Evernote basically, they killed themselves like to be the first app in every new marketplace launch. So they were on the Android, they were on iOS, they were on Google Play. Like they were the first one on all of those. And like Windows 8 flopped, but all the others, like they got incredible growth from being first on some of those massive platforms that had Apple, Verizon, Google marketing dollars, like driving adoption of those platforms. And they're one of the very first, you know, apps and tools on there.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty incredible. Like that was an awesome interview.
No, that's cool. What's the most surprising thing you learned about growth from one of these people as you kind of put together this book?
Yeah. So I think I'm always surprised, like how much thought these people put into it. So like, you know, coming from like, if you were to read blog posts on marketing, you would just kind of assume that it's something that happens and like people write blog posts and it's, you know, it's like a blog post works or it doesn't, or, you know, like product gets traction or it doesn't. But it's crazy, like talking to the guys at Kayak, like they were very, very intentional about what features they rolled out, how they approached their marketing, like the types of deals they went after. And then the other thing too that I think is not talked about enough in startup land is like the importance of branding and positioning. Like there were a lot of like Jimmy Wales, especially, he was just like fanatical about like, we are not going to do any sort of marketing like this. Like, we're not going to hire SEO companies or anything like this, because like that reflects badly on the Wikipedia brand, and the brand is like all we have. And I think that in the day of like, follow people on Twitter and favorite their tweets so they follow you back and like do this in an automated fashion, it's very much not, it's not like brand conscious. Like, you
Exactly.
you're not really thinking about like, what does that say about the type of company you are or you represent or anything. So
I really like that one, because it does seem like there's two camps. There's traditional marketers that know everything about brand and couldn't direct market if their life depended on it. And then there's the direct marketers, the growth hackers, the startup marketers, and they're all about, did the channel have a positive ROI? I don't care how ugly the logo is. But really, why do you have to pick one? Why can't you have an awesome brand like Apple and know what makes you money and double down on it? It's not like you can do both. I mean, when I think about Growth Hacker TV, I want a brand that also can market like a growth hacker all at the same time. And it goes back to that original thing you said, that design has a role that people don't realize. I mean, besides Craigslist, what ugly thing has worked? I mean, there's not many. Like, you can count them on one hand. But all the things that have worked that we know about, they're beautiful also. So I'm not saying we need to be traditional marketers, but I agree. We need to drag brand into the conversation, because it matters, even if it's not the main thing we need to focus on.
Yeah, and I think that even if you're running like an incredibly data-driven, analytics-driven company, like, you are still getting somewhere between 30 and 50% of your signups that you just like can't attribute.
It's like direct.
And yeah, exactly. And like, that is just a fact of the industry.
Yeah.
And I am like gonna go out on a limb and say that your brand impacts at like a significant chunk of that unattributed percentage. And so if you want to grow that, like, I think brand is very much worth thinking about, especially in the early stages of a company.
Yeah, I totally agree. Now let me ask you this. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I mean, I don't think that you want to be in a space where you're like always searching for the next growth hack to like try and get people into your product funnel. Like, I think at some point you want to growth hack your way to like brand awareness, and then let brand like that kind of take over and create like a snowball effect.
You mentioned earlier the word positioning, and it goes back to a book by Al Ries, which was, the title of the book was Positioning, The Battle for Your Mind, or something like that. And the thing about a brand is, if you can get your brand to occupy a place in their mind that's not currently occupied by some other brand or some other product, you literally have real estate in somebody's head. I mean, that's the most valuable thing in the world. But that comes back to brand. And like you said, growth hacking may get your foot in the door, but the brand is what allows you to live in their mind forever. I mean, Apple, I say that again because Apple lives in my mind in a special way that other brands don't.
Yeah.
And if they had growth hacked into it, great, but they didn't stay because of growth hacking necessarily.
Right. I mean, I think a great case is like, look at Vine versus like Vidi or SocialCam. Like, SocialCam Vidi massively growth hacked, like had tens of millions of users, I think like 50 million at some point. And yet, like, after those growth hacks stopped working, they just went back down. Whereas Vine like did some of the similar stuff, but also great design, like great team, very brand focused, very like concise message, and knew what the product was about. And they're still growing like incredibly. And a lot of that is just brand driven because people want to be involved with what they're doing,
Yeah, absolutely. So let me ask you this. In your opinion, you wrote a book about advice that other people are giving us, and we should follow some of that advice. That's what I do on this show on Growth Hacker TV. We talk, we give people advice on what to do. But then you also hear the idea of, if you're talking about it, it's too late, and you need to be doing stuff that's so new, it's on nobody's radar. What's the balance there? How much of it is reading books like Traction, watching Growth Hacker TV, learning from experts, and how much is it you need to go into a dark room, be super creative, and come up with something that's never been done? What do you think about that?
Yeah, so I think basically there are principles that you want to follow, and like that's what we try and lay out in Traction book is like, here's how at a high level strategically you should think about and approach the process of getting traction. Like, I think that the first five chapters of the Traction book for like 50 years, people would be like, man, that's like good advice, and like, this is how you should approach a marketing thing. And then maybe like, the other 19 channel specific chapters probably won't make sense in 50 years. And so I think like you take high level strategy and you apply them to grow rapidly in new channels. So I think it's definitely a balance. I will say though that there are basics that work and that I think a lot of people feel like they need to find the next cutting edge growth hack
Hmm.
when that's not necessarily true. You know, like if you're doing a B2B SaaS startup, like there are very tried and true marketing tactics that you can optimize the heck out of. And then once you get the basics down and you need to like hit your next level of growth,
Hmm.
then by all means, like experiment with crazy stuff. That's how it should go.
Hmm.
But I would nail down the basics first. Like if you're getting 0 customers, like why experiment with all these crazy things? Just like you can do the basics, like ads, outbound email, blog posts, like all these things
Hmm.
that work really well, you know?
And you have to really understand and execute the fundamentals before you move on. You know, it's like I play basketball, and it's like, because I'm good at the fundamentals, I'm not that fancy, and yet I can win. Other people are fancy, but they don't have the fundamentals.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's not even fair when you combat against somebody that really has the fundamentals in any area. Because it's almost like an unfair advantage because they have the base layer that they can build off of, and when they decide to get fancy, it's going to matter.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think of it like growth is like losing weight in some ways, where it's like if you wanted to lose 100 pounds, you not tell them to like try the ketogenic diet and like all this crazy like stuff.
They just stop
You'd
eating
be like,
McDonald's.
okay. Yeah,
Just the basics.
Exactly. Like eat cleaner, work out for like half an hour a day, like, and you'll see gains from that. Once you have those down, we'll talk basic. Losing the last pounds, you know, and I think that a lot of marketing is about like people talk about losing the last 20 pounds and not just like nailing the basics.
I love that. That's great. All right, so let's talk about Airbrake a little bit. You were formerly the director of revenue there. So first, what is a director of revenue? What'd you actually do there?
Yeah, so that Airbrake was interesting. So basically, we were a developer tools company. Our founder bought a bunch of small developer tools that had several thousand users on the order of thousands of dollars a month in revenue. And the challenge there, since he was buying a developer tools product from developers, the challenge there was not like, how do we build this amazing product that resonates with people? It was like, how do we make this a sustainable business? Because to give you a sense, one of the products we bought was charging $2 a month for one of their products. And so
I don't care what you're selling. If you're selling for $2 a month, you messed up.
Yeah, exactly. It's like one support email and that customer is like unprofitable for 3 months, you know,
Exactly.
just in terms of your time. So yeah, and so that's a very different challenge than the average person who comes on in like a growth capacity and is like, we need to grow this in terms of users and like product and like all this stuff. We were just like, okay, we have these products, we know that they're working, we're getting signups, and now we need to figure out how to grow the revenue side and like build a real business behind it.
Yeah, it sounds like a fun role to kind of get to play.
Yeah, it was. So that's why I don't think you see that title that much, but like literally everything I did was like revenue.
Yeah, I want that. It sounds fun. I'd like to go into a place and be like, all right, I want to help you guys make money.
Yeah.
All right, so as the director of revenue, I'm sure there's only a handful of levers you can really pull to kind of get revenue up. We talked about the fundamentals before, the basics. You already mentioned pricing, so I'm sure that's one of those levers. What were the main levers? Pricing, and what else were you kind of, let's change this because it matters for revenue. Let's change this because it matters for revenue.
Yeah, so pricing is a massive one. Like people, like it's insane. It's just nuts, like how important that is in terms of, not even in terms of like driving revenue, but in terms of being able to do meaningful things for your customers, in terms of opening up new acquisition channels. Like, we were doing AdWords, and until we changed pricing, which to be fair was relatively quickly, like the guys that we bought it from were like, oh yeah, AdWords doesn't work. And we're like, well, they're charging $2 a month. So like,
unless you have a 50% conversion rate and you're getting dollar clicks, you can't make it work.
Exactly. Like maybe you're doing something off here. And so when you raise the price, like it opens up all kinds of things you can do on the customer acquisition side. But even more than that, from, your better position as like a premium product that, has meaningful things, you can invest more money in building new features. You can do cool things for your customers. Like what we basically did is we took a tool and built a bunch of like made a meaningful business out of it with actual customer support that we could afford to hire people for because we were charging money and like, all these good things that our customers later appreciated. And, the net of it is like, people in general are happy to pay you money if you provide them a service. Like, I would rather pay someone, some company like $50, $100 a month and get responses to my support tickets than like $2 a month and have to wait a week every time I have an issue. You know?
Were you surprised at how much the market could bear in terms of price? Did you raise the price and wow, they're still paying, and raise the price? Wow, they're still paying. Was that kind of your experience?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. Because it's one of those things where especially in developer tools, it's like very clear that, we have built this thing and we will maintain it and we will make sure it doesn't go down. Or you can have one of your engineers who's making 120K, like build this in like 3 weeks, a month, and then have to maintain it for the rest of the time. And then when he leaves, you have to like train someone else. It's just like
the value prop is obvious. Exactly.
It's so obvious. It's like, I am buying my engineer's time back for $39 a month, $89 a month. It's brain dead, especially with how hard it is to hire engineers. So,
so we talked about pricing, and that's obviously a huge lever. Was there any other levers, or is that kind of it? Like the product's built, now just figure out pricing. Was there anything else in that mix?
Yeah. So the other big lever was adding an enterprise account. So for enterprises, like, I mean, that's kind of pricing, but it's also a product thing. Like, we had a bunch of enterprises that wanted on-premise Airbrake installs. Did that, big lever. And then the last one that was huge was a really long churn reduction campaign. And so we basically saw that our churn was higher than we wanted it to be, and spent like 2 months working through the activation, the onboarding, like figuring out, doing user interviews, figuring out why people were canceling, and then addressing those issues, doing like win back stuff. It was a lot. But I mean, in the end, we cut churn by like 70%, which was just a huge win for us. Like one of the biggest levers, because that's not something that many companies optimize on. Like the good ones do. Like Kissmetrics, you see them talk about this all the time. But a product built by developers that they didn't charge them wasn't a real business. Like they had some churn problems, and so
absolutely,
so that was really a massive win for us.
Yeah, no, those are some cool takeaways from Airbrake. So thanks for kind of diving into that, even though you're not currently there right now. Now you also do a course, which is like the perfect course for this audience. It's SQL for marketing. So what's actually the name of it? SQL for marketers and growth hackers. Is that the name of the course?
Yeah.
Right? And you sell it on Udemy, right?
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah. So first, what is SQL? Explain that to us, and we'll kind of start there.
Yeah. So it's basically at high level, it's a database programming language. But like, what it actually is imagine you had. This is how I like to describe it to marketers who don't know what it is. Like, imagine you had an Excel spreadsheet that automatically logged like every single action that one of your users took in your app. Everything they did, like when they visited your site, when they signed up, how they signed up, what they bought, when they came back, like anything. And so what SQL does is it basically gives you the tools to query that Excel spreadsheet. And so, like all that is maintained in a database. SQL is just the language that you use to pull information out of a database, just like you would, the function bar in Excel.
Yeah. So give us like just kind of a really broad example of a query that a marketer might want to run. What might they pull out of this database, just to give people an idea if they haven't used it before?
Totally. Yeah. So like something that is impossible to do in Google Analytics, like show me the last 100 people that spent more than $100 on my website.
There you go.
Like that's pretty hard to do. It's even annoying to configure in like Mixpanel or Kissmetrics. But with SQL, it's like literally like select from this table, and then it's 2 lines. So it's like a 4-line thing in total.
All right. So it's programming. They're learning a programming language that interfaces with a database, right?
Yeah, I try not to say that because everyone...
It scares them.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, oh, I'm a mark. Oh, I don't want to learn programming. But like in reality, it's like learning Excel or something. There are like a couple key principles you get down, and you are immediately like 10x more effective at becoming data-driven.
Okay, so how long does that process take? Because there's people watching this right now, a large number of people, that they want to know how to use SQL. They see the benefit when you say that example you just gave, but they are scared of programming. They don't consider themselves engineers. If they're technically savvy to some degree, and let's say they take your course, I'll give you a plug there, how long does this process take? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Is it 2 weeks? How long does it really take to get up and running to do meaningful queries?
Yeah, so one, I don't think you even need to be that technically savvy. Like, you'll have a developer set some things up, and you're literally typing like into a box and hitting enter.
Okay.
So that's one. But it's literally like so my course is 2 hours. At the end of 2 hours, people are writing queries. They're querying a database, and there are like 7, 8 commands that you need to keep on a reference sheet whenever you want to write a SQL query. But that's it. Like, you can learn SQL in a day and start using it. It's just like, understand the principles, have a reference sheet for how you use these different functions, and then the way you combine them determines like what you'll pull out of the database.
Gotcha.
It's like I sound like one of the scam marketers right now, and I'm like, it's easy, but like, seriously, it's really easy. Like, you can learn it 2 hours, you're done, you'll know SQL, throw it on your resume, and you'll be like a way better data-driven marketer.
Yeah. So this has been such an interesting interview because we start out talking about the importance of brand, and we end with SQL programming, which is like the far sides of this curve. In the future, are all the great marketers great at brand and SQL queries, or does the future belong to just the technical people? Because that's what it seems is being put out there, is it's all going technical. But what do you think? How does it shake out?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that being a technical marketer is extremely useful. Like, the only reason, so it's extremely useful, I will say. So Airbrake got acquired by Rackspace, and the marketing team at Rackspace, like, not technical, but they didn't have to be. Like, I had to be technical because, you know, I was a startup, like, I was almost a one-man show, and it's like, hey, developers who are building our product 60 hours a week, can you run like this little query for me? They're like, no, like, I have stuff to do, you know? And so
I'm a real engineer.
Yeah. And so I think that being data-driven, or not data-driven, well, yes, data-driven, but being technical and in marketing is like an incredibly powerful skill set. But I think that that is far more important at the beginning, whereas being a brand-aware marketer like gets far more important as you look at scaling and building like a larger company.
Yeah.
You know, like, there's a certain point where you can just hire out technical skills and it doesn't become a necessity anymore. That point is not at the early stages of a startup.
That's right. And early on, and to kind of go into this a little bit, why is it that the brand matters later, not early on? And one reason is building a brand can be really expensive if you're using ad money to do it. So early on, you need to be more direct response. I put money in, I get money out, and it's always positive. And then you build up a little bit of momentum, a little bit of bankroll. Now you can invest in things that are more fuzzy and loosely defined and whatever, and still get ROI and not really sure how. It's a different game. You can't play the Mercedes game when you're, you know, a startup at Airbrake. You know, Mercedes doesn't need to know that every commercial they ran sold X number of cars. They're, you know, I've heard it said before by the CEO of Mercedes. He said, if we stop running commercials now, our sales will decline in 50 years. It's like, that's a different ball game because they're building brand and awareness that, you know, we don't have the money to play that game, even if it's an important one to play eventually. So I think it's just good to be a great marketer. You need to know why Mercedes does what it does, why Airbrake does what it does, and what the difference is.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, I will say, I think you need to be building a brand and be aware of like how you want to position in the early stages. But, you know, the early stage startup branding game is entirely different than like Esurance. Like, Esurance like has $1 billion to spend on advertising every year. You know, like, most startups would be happy to just get valued at $1 billion. Like, when you have $1 billion, there are only so many places in the world you can put that to reach people, and that's where you get into like brand building and all this other stuff. Because I don't even know that you could spend $1 billion on like direct response marketing.
If you could, I don't think you could. Like, I don't even know if you can spend on TV and direct response. Like, I don't know. Like, if there's that many relevant channels to spend that much ad money. I mean, I have a hard time spending $1,000 a day on Facebook sometimes. Like, I can't spend $1,000 a day. They won't let me. They're like, you're out of people in this niche market to actually spend money. And I'm like, well, all right, I'll try again tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. And so when you have $1 billion, like, that's where branding becomes important. I think, one, because, you know, you want to get that in the consumer's headspace, and two, like, there's almost nothing else you can spend it on, you know?
Yeah.
So, like, sure, a lot of that's wasted, but I mean, there's nothing else to do
You
with
don't have a
it.
lot of options. It's a different kind of thing. You have to know the game you're playing at every stage of the process, so you don't imitate the wrong people, so you don't want to be like the wrong people, and so you don't pick the wrong strategies. You got to know
Yeah.
where you're at in the life cycle of your company and what kind of company you're in. Well, Justin, this has been an awesome interview. There's been so many really insightful things. I asked this to all the guests. It's the final question. What's the best advice you have for any startup that's trying to grow?
For any startup to grow.
Yeah.
So I would say the best advice is just be aware of where you are in terms of your kind of growth path, and then find one channel, execute on it until it stops working, and that's when you start looking at like growth hacking techniques to, you know, hit the next like stage of growth.
Yeah. That's awesome advice to end on, and I totally agree. And there's been a few guests in the past that said the exact same thing. Find a channel, figure it out, be awesome at it, then venture out and do something else, either different or creative. So I think that's a theme on this show of find one customer acquisition channel that you know, and then everything else works itself out usually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Well, Justin, thanks again for coming on Growth Hacker TV. It's been awesome.
Awesome. Thanks, Bronson.